The hum of the courtroom felt like a physical weight, pressing down on me. I sat there, rigid, my hands clenched in my lap, the image of her face playing on repeat behind my eyes. Tanya, my wife, or, as I was beginning to understand, the woman I thought I knew. The divorce proceedings had been ugly from the start. Her lawyers were vultures, picking apart the life we'd built together, trying to bleed me dry. But I had known going in they would try to make me out as the bad guy, as being somehow at fault for the demise of our relationship. But for the last 4 months, I hadn't been sleeping or eating. I'd simply been surviving. When they'd said that she'd moved on, I'd thought they'd meant her to a new place, to her mother's perhaps. Not that she'd moved on, with someone else. Today was different, though. Today was the day she had to look me in the eye and answer for the accusations I'd leveled against her. Adultery, the word had felt like a physical blow when I'd whispered it to my lawyer. Not because of the word itself, but because it was now fact. I hadn't wanted it to be, but now it was. Her voice, when she spoke to the judge, was calm, almost serene. "I have nothing to hide, Your Honor," she said, her gaze steady, not once flicking in my direction. I wanted to scream, to claw at the composed façade she'd constructed. How could she sit there, so brazen, after everything? The audacity was breathtaking. My lawyer, Mr. Thompson, gave me a reassuring nod, and I managed to take a slow breath. I trusted him. He was thorough, meticulous. He'd assured me that the evidence was substantial. I had hired a private investigator, and I knew the report would reveal the truth, though I hadn't read it all. I'd seen enough. That was when the courtroom door opened, and a man I hadn't seen before stepped inside. He was tall, with a serious face and tired eyes. It was the private investigator, Mr. Ramirez. He had walked in with a simple manila envelope under his arm. I saw the color drain from Tanya's face when she noticed him. Her hands, which had been so still just moments ago, began to tremble. A small involuntary gasp escaped her lips. The transformation was startling, like watching a mask slip off a performer. It was proof she had been lying. I felt a cold, hard knot loosen in my chest. It wasn't victory yet, but it was a start. I watched, a morbid fascination taking over, as Mr. Ramirez approached the stand, Mr. Thompson leading him. He was sworn in and stated his name, and that was it. He didn't look at her once as he began to detail his findings. The judge, a stern-faced woman who had heard enough sob stories for one lifetime, leaned forward. The room seemed to hold its breath as Mr. Ramirez began. He spoke of surveillance, of coded messages, of rendezvous in hidden corners of the city. He described with a methodical detachment the late-night meetings in hotel rooms and secret weekend getaways. With each word, I could feel my rage building back up. I'd known what she'd done, but hearing the cold facts laid out like this, it was like being stabbed all over again. And the man, Jerome, was someone I'd met, a friend of one of my friends from work. This hurt more, as she'd been living this lie right under my nose. I saw the flush rise on Tanya's neck, spreading up her cheeks. She fidgeted in her seat, finally looking over to me, her eyes wide with a mixture of panic and something that might have been shame. She was falling apart, piece by agonizing piece. Mr. Thompson asked to admit the evidence collected, a set of photographs. The judge approved. They were passed around, starting with the judge and the bailiff, then to her lawyer, then finally to her. Mr. Ramirez had a keen eye and a steady hand. The photos weren't explicit, but they didn't need to be. The looks she was giving the other man, the way they touched, the intimate gestures, the pictures spoke volumes. They told a story of betrayal, a narrative of deceit that I had, until that moment, only believed to be fragments. Now it was a mosaic of treachery. Tanya didn't look at the photos. Her lawyer, a man who had been all bluster and arrogance just minutes before, sat in silent defeat. I could feel the eyes of everyone in the courtroom on her, waiting for some explanation, some rebuttal. Finally, she found her voice. These are taken out of context," she stammered, her voice shaking. "They aren't what they seem." I laughed, a short, bitter sound. "Oh, please, Tanya. Don't insult everyone's intelligence. I've lost everything. You have no idea what you've done." I tried to remain calm, but the rage threatened to bubble over. I saw her glance quickly at me and then look away. Mr. Thompson continued his questioning. "Mrs. Carter, can you explain the multiple trips to the Ocean View Hotel, registered under the name Mr. and Mrs. Davis?" Can you explain the text messages on your phone that discuss meeting Jerome there? These were deleted, Mrs. Carter, but Mr. Ramirez managed to retrieve them. She remained silent, staring at the floor. The judge, her expression grave, fixed her eyes on Tanya. Mrs. Carter, she said, her voice quiet but firm, do you have anything to say to these allegations? This evidence, Tanya finally broke. I don't know what to say. Her voice was barely a whisper, the facade of confidence shattered into a million pieces. I looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in what felt like forever. I saw not the woman I'd married, not the woman I'd loved, but a stranger, a liar, a cheat. The woman I thought I knew was nothing but a phantom, a mirage conjured up from lies. The judge ruled in my favor. The divorce would proceed with a fair distribution of assets, the consequences of her deception laid bare for all to see. It was more than just a legal victory. It was the validation of my pain, the acknowledgement of the betrayal. It was justice. Later, as I walked out of the courtroom, I saw her standing near the entrance, her head bowed. The bravado that had been so prevalent, so offensive, had completely evaporated. She looked small, pathetic, alone. And that, in a strange way, gave me some satisfaction. I walked past her, not even glancing in her direction. The bitterness was still there, of course, a cold weight in my heart, but it wasn't all-encompassing anymore. I knew that she was now living with the consequences of her decisions, with the shame she deserved. For the first time in months, I was taking a deep breath. It was a long, slow exhale of all the pain and anger that had been building for the past 4 months. I may have been broken, but I was beginning to piece myself back together, and I would start building my new life. The first step was walking out the doors, away from her. I left her standing there in the hallway, a ghost of the woman she'd pretended to be. I felt no triumph, no joy, only a profound sadness. Sadness for the life we could have had, the love we'd never really shared, and the lies she had chosen to live. But as I stepped out into the bright afternoon sun, I knew one thing for sure, I had finally been set free. And now, I could finally start to rebuild a new life. One where I would be better at choosing the company I kept, and someone would value me and our relationship. It would be a long road, but I was ready to take the first step.